everyone. My name is Shannel Pinidiya, and today I want to ask you one main question before I start with my speech. Do you all have a favorite story? Can I see a raise of hands here? If any one of you has a favorite movie or a favorite story? Now, I have another question for you. I want you to look at any very popular common media, whether it be printed or whether it be visual. And I'm going to give you a few examples just to make things easier. For example, The Notebook, Me Before You, The Fault in Our Stars, P.S. I Love You, and Harry Potter. Now, there are two things all of these stories have in common. One of them being that they all have sad moments, that they all have heartbreaking moments. The second thing being that they all have happy moments. Okay, now I have another question. How many of you here have watched the Titanic? Okay. How many of you, let me rephrase, how many of you here have watched the Titanic knowing that you're about to cry? Okay, I see a good few hands here. Bear with me, one more question for the moment. How many of you here have watched the Titanic and thought it was a terrible movie? Okay, for the very few of you who are raising your hands secretly, I agree with you. But for the sake of argument, I'm going to take on the majority. The Titanic had many sad moments, had many heartbreaking moments, and yet it was not a terrible movie. Why then, the moment our life becomes, or the moment our life has sad chapters, do we think it's a terrible life and a life not worth living? I'm going to let that thought settle for a moment. I'm going to move on from it, give you a bit of a reprieve. I want to talk about romanticizing living and what does romanticization in the status quo look like. There are two things. One, happily ever after and all things good. Secondly, the romanticization of abuse. Now, these are two ideas I do not subscribe to, and I'm going to tell you one by one why. Firstly, the romanticization of happily ever afters. The stories we grew up with, the stories that make up our youth are Cinderella, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, all fairy tales. Now, what did all of these fairy tales have in common? They had a happily ever after. And when I think of these fairy tales, the first thing that comes to my mind is the fairy godmother, the magical glitter, the pumpkin carriage, Prince Charming saving the day. Only upon second thought is when I remember of the evil stepmothers, the stepsisters, is when I remember all the negative connotations that came with it. Even now, I'm struggling to remind myself of them. And that was purely intentional, and let me tell you why. The original stories were written by a duo called the Grimm brothers. And if you have read their stories, you'd realize that you'll be very thankful that these were rewritten. Hans Christian Andersen, he was not the original author, because these stories were far too morbid and far too dark for a child not to read them, for a child to read them and not have recurring nightmares as they grow up. But there was an unintended, unforeseen consequence of this. Children need to grow up with rainbows and daisies and flowers, yes. But when they grow up thinking that their world would be a reflection of that, without a sprinkling of rain, without the idea that an upcoming storm is possible, they form expectations that are quite frankly not true. Now I'm going to leave that there as well for a side, and let me tackle on the romanticization of abuse. Sadly, especially in young adult literature, abuse has been romanticized. Trauma has been romanticized. People make excuses for it, or people forgive it easily. And when I tell you to romanticize your struggles, this is not what I mean. Let me give you an example. I grew up in a very loving family. I grew up with a family that supported me every step of the way. However, I published a book recently, a while ago, and it went on to win a very prestigious award. And there were a few people who disagreed with me. But throughout this little journey of mine, I've only received positive acclamations, positive feedback, praise, and like any teenage girl, I thrive on validation. And because I was so unused to getting negative feedback and criticism, I didn't know how to deal with it, and there was a time I let it get me down. But here's what I did. Ironically, most of my favorite characters from books, they are writers themselves. And they too faced their fair share of criticism. But that didn't mean I looked down upon them. That didn't mean I thought them as any less worthy of my praise, of my support. So why then? This brings me to the question, why? The moment I received minimal criticism, did I think I was not worthy of such an award? Did I think I was not worthy of the place I had worked hard and achieved in life? Now I'm going to go back to the romanticization of abuse for a second. When I say you need to romanticize your struggles and your hardships, this is what I mean. A few nights ago, I was honest to God struggling at what I should talk about today. It was 11 p.m. in the night, and I was panicking because I still hadn't figured it out. And I had this epiphany that I could do two things. One, I could wallow in my own misery and blame every external circumstance for my own creativity block. Or I could make myself the main character of my own story, and I could find my way out of it. And this is what I did. And this to you might not seem very aesthetically pleasing, but to me it was. And the key to this is that you find what is aesthetically pleasing for you. So I sat down, I went to the extremes of lighting a candle, sitting in the dark. I sat down and I took down an old book I had, which is basically parchment paper, and an old vintage pen, dipped it in ink, and I wrote down every single thought that came to my head and what connected me to the topics I love. And this is where the idea of romanticization was born. And if you look closely, you could still see the ink under my fingernails. What did I do now? I made a hardship. I made something that stressed me out unbelievably into something magical. So now the weight on my shoulders was less and the burden wasn't so tiresome to carry. Because I made it into something I love. That is what romanticization of struggles mean. That is what romanticization of your healing journey means. Find a way to do it which is easier for you. Find a way to do it which you love, because you already do this when you choose the books you want to read, when you choose the movies you want to watch. So if these main characters can make their life magical while struggling, why can't you make your life magical while struggling? And this brings me to my final point. I've told you how romanticizing hardships makes life easier to bear. Now I want to tell you how romanticizing the good things in life makes it all the more sweeter. One final question for you. What are the most cliche moments you see in movies? Dancing in the rain, your main character having a personal conversation with their friends, laughing with their friends, cuddling with the person you love on a sofa. Whatever it is, those magical cliche moments, don't we all do them in our own life too? Do we not laugh with our friends? Do we not take strolls in the rain? Do we not have our own little soliloquies to ourselves? We do. But the problem is, it is never as special as they are in movies. But why? If you can imagine it in a book, if you can make it special in a movie, why not make it special in your own life? So go out, dance in the rain when it's raining, go out, have a good time. When you're sipping that last sip of coffee before you go to school, look out your window. And you can make that garden your secret garden. And you can make that last sip of coffee your Felix Felicis, your magical potion. Your imagination is an extremely powerful asset, one of the most powerful assets you have in your life. If you're able to make it work while reading a book, make the conscious decision to make it work while you're going through your daily life. Because then what do? Not only do you cement the happy moments, add color to it, make it more vivid, make it more picturesque, you make the sad moments that little bit easier to bear. And that is extremely important. Can anyone deny here that they do not need that little addition of pixie dust? We all have hard lives. We all have obstacles we face that make life difficult, whether you're a teenager or whether you are an adult. And we all thought that Neverland was lost to us the moment we grew up, the moment we did our O-levels. or the moment we faced our first public exam, but it's not. You don't need to escape into a different reality. You can make your own reality magical. And if you are able to take anything from my speech, now one last question. I know it's been a lot to bear, but one last question. How many of you here have a comfort character you can relate to? Raise your hands. I sure do. And while my comfort character may be fighting dragons, while my comfort character may be dealing with the politics of the world, she's still a teenager. What does that mean? She still struggles with things like self-worth. She still struggles with things like morality, trust. She's just like me, and I'm able to relate to her. And when she struggles, I can put myself in her shoes and I can support her. So when I struggle, why don't I make myself the main character? And how this psychologically works is you transfer a level of power to yourself. Because the moment you tell yourself, I am the Harry Potter of my story, I am the one who can make it change, your external environment fades to the background. So when we do this, we make life a little bit easier to bear. It's your life. You're the Harry Potter of your story. You're the Percy Jackson of your story. So what if it has sad chapters? You can make these sad chapters even a tad bit more magical, and you can make the upcoming chapters special. And if there's anything you can take away from my speech, love yourself like you love your favorite characters. Love yourself in order to make the impacts needed to make yourself happy. Thank you.